Hi, and welcome to the SCD Lifestyle Solution podcast number 27. I'm Steve Wright, and on the line with me is Jordan Reasoner. How's it going, man?
It's going great, man. I'm so excited right now. We have a very special guest today. It's probably going to be my favorite podcast we've ever done.
Yeah, this is by far the biggest name, the biggest interview that we have ever done, so I am stoked. And the crazy thing is that I read about this guy when I first started reading Breaking the Vicious Cycle, and I didn't even know that a couple years later I might interview him. So this is pretty amazing. He runs his own practice in New York. He's written 6 books. His credential sheet is like seriously a mile long, and he has the longest running medical talk show called Health Talk on WOR Radio. He's basically the biggest rock star in the natural health world, and we're really pleased and thankful that he's able to spend some time with us today. So I want to welcome everybody, Dr. Ronald Hoffman. And Doctor, could you just start off with telling the listeners on the show today a little bit more about yourself?
So my background story is that I am a nutritionally oriented physician or an integrative physician. I've been doing this since 1985, I think was my first year of practice. So I've been out there for quite some time. And I'm trained at, all the usual mainstream places, Albert Einstein College of Medicine, Columbia College undergraduate. I trained at NYU and Bellevue. And so I've always been interested in how nutrition can impact disease. And my first approach nutritionally to gastrointestinal problems was, at the time, I was very much into macrobiotic diets. Do you know about the macrobiotic diet? Michio Kushi and all that stuff. And that's a vegetarian, like a vegan diet, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what I found was that the macrobiotic diet was beneficial for a lot of conditions. It really helped people with cardiovascular problems, sometimes with diabetes, if applied properly. But I really didn't have anything that was that helpful for people with digestive problems. I mean, sometimes it would help them a little bit, but it just wasn't cutting it. And a lot of people came to me with ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, and I just didn't really feel like I was doing that much for them. And, and the idea was, in those days, was, look, you've been on a really crappy American diet. I studied the epidemiology of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. It really appears to be a Western-type problem. And so the thought was, get on a really clean diet, don't eat a lot of meat, don't eat a lot of fat, detoxify your body, eat all natural foods, organic foods, and, lots of fresh fruits and vegetables and salads. Get plenty of fiber. Also, in the epidemiology is the notion that if you eat a lot of fiber, fiber is somewhat preventive against ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease and certain other digestive diseases like diverticulitis. So it all seemed to make sense that, just get on a healthy diet and the body will heal itself. Well, it didn't in most cases. So I didn't really have that much in my arsenal to treat the condition, except the faith that this diet was somehow a panacea for virtually all problems. So around that time, I heard from a colleague who is probably known to you, Dr. Leo Galland, Galland, about a diet that was helpful for ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. And so I got the book in the edition, prior to obviously, I wrote the introduction. And I said, well, this is really interesting, but it's so different. It's like a diet that allows meat, perish the thought, and it minimizes all these wonderful whole grains that we thought were so good for you. But I said, my patients weren't getting any better, so I said, let's try this. And fairly early on, I started to see really good responses. And the rest is history. I got very interested in the diet, and I actually then had the opportunity to interview Elaine Gottschall on my radio program several times. And then I got a request from her to, as a clinician, she was very happy that a clinician a medical doctor was endorsing the diet and using the diet, had some experience and understanding of the diet. So she said, well, why don't you write, we're doing another edition of the book. why don't you please write the introduction of the book? I said, well, I'd be very honored to write the introduction. Thank you very much. I mean, you're the pioneer, but I just want to lend whatever credibility I can to this book. And that's it. So the rest is history on that.
Well, thank you. First of all, I mean, that's how I learned about you, and that's how I was introduced to you, is when I read Breaking the Vicious Cycle, when I was somebody who is, struggling with my own digestive problems and wondering how to find my way out of the rabbit hole of digestion problems. So I appreciate that you wrote that and that you did lend your name to it, because I think it's really important when people with some more credentials, get behind things like this to bring them to light. So.
Right. And, I think it's for doctors. I mean, some doctors are wary of lending their name to things that are perhaps less scientific or less speculative. But I'm really in the business of doing that. I really advocate dietary approaches to disease, and where they work, I'm anxious to get the word out. And I'm a communicator. I want to spread the word to the public. So it says here, the second question. Excuse me. You've been educating about diet's impact on health for a long time. What do you tell new patients, physicians who've never bought into this concept? I think I reiterate what Elaine Gottschall had been saying about the issue of fermentation and how you can alter the bacterial composition of your GI tract. And sometimes when talking to physicians or patients, I say, look, we recognize that in the treatment of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, it is sometimes helpful to alter the intestinal flora. So it's not an uncommon thing sometimes to give patients Flagyl for inflammatory bowel disease. And that may be okay for a while because it will suppress bacterial overgrowth. By the way, bacterial overgrowth, since Elaine Gottschall wrote the book, I mean, she was prophetic. Bacterial overgrowth has become a cottage industry. Not a cottage industry. It's become a cottage industry, something small. It's become a major component of big pharma because they now have drugs for treating bacterial overgrowth. The latest one is the, what do you call it? I'll remember in just a minute, but I don't usually prescribe it. But the notion that bacteria overgrow especially in the small intestine is really now well accepted. And there are tests, there's hydrogen breath tests and challenge tests that are used to establish that diagnosis. And medication has actually been developed specifically not to cross the lumen of the GI tract, antibiotics that that really eradicate pathogenic bacteria in the GI tract. And then there's, of course, a lot of development in the writing about probiotics. But so the point I make is, how are you going to change your flora? If we do believe that flora is important in the causation of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, and why we believe that is that some of the best research now suggests that it's inappropriate signaling. Bacteria have, I'm sure you're familiar with the term, crosstalk with the immune system via the Peyer's patches in the small intestine and other immune sites in the large intestine. So it's kind of like you have to have the right bacteria to set up the right immunity. And if you have the wrong mix of bacteria, then you get in trouble, and you might have an inappropriate inflammatory response to the bacteria that are not happy bacteria, and that's how you propagate this inflammatory bowel disease, and the whole immune system catches fire with that. So I tell people, well, how are you going to, the antibiotics have a transient effect. All antibiotics, there's a tendency to develop resistance. So a couple of other ways you can do that is you can use diet modification, because if you alter the substrate for the bacterial composition changes. Carnivores have different bacterial composition than vegetarians, and starch eaters have bacterial proliferation, whereas non-starch eaters have less. And then there's probiotics. That's the other promising way to do that. And I guess you could throw in herbs somewhere too, but herbs is kind of a quasi-pharmacological way of altering your flora, right? So so then that starts to make sense to patients and doctors. So the next question that comes up, so the next question that comes up is, so why do we have bad bacteria? What's wrong? I mean, you know, why is there such an epidemic of bad bacteria in the intestinal tract? And this is really coming, I think there was another prophetic movement in the holistic community, in the integrative community, which is the discovery that there was such a thing as Candida. In those days, they talked about the yeast connection, Candida. I think it's a more sophisticated view of that is that yeast is one of the pathogens that develop in response to diets that are sugary or starchy, or overuse of antibiotics, or drinking water which is chlorinated or fluoridated, or exposure to bad bacteria in the environment, because we may be breeding pathogenic bacteria via livestock or via hospitals where we use too many antibiotics. And so babies are born in hospitals. Sometimes they're given more antibiotics than mom feeds them sugary foods and starchy foods. What's wrong with that? Well, then there's another guy who's a very seminal thinker in this field, Loren Cordain. Have you heard of Loren Cordain? He's the paleo diet guy.
Oh, yeah, I got all his books.
Excellent. So he's really laying the foundation, from paleobiology, that humans were, and the human GI tract was designed to eat a different composition of food. So all these ideas kind of come together around the Gottschall diet, and the Gottschall diet is a nice, it's a nice tool for introducing patients to these ideas. And so, but I think there's some resistance from doctors, because on a real basic level, they just can't understand how you could ask patients to follow such a crazy diet. Because for them, their orientation is, I've had doctors yell at me for telling patients just to eliminate wheat. Like, how could you put patients on such a nutritionally restricted diet and create such a imposition on their lifestyle when you don't have absolute proof that they have full-blown celiac disease? And I say short of celiac disease, there's a lot of problems people can have. You don't have to have flattened villi and positive transglutamase antibodies to benefit from a wheat-free diet. And that's just one among many starchy foods that cause problems. So, there really is kind of a conceptual wall there when doctors don't want to employ diet. I think many gastroenterologists say there's no proof, and they're waiting for very, very extensive experimental evidence, which may be very hard to develop here. This is not a pharmaceutical drug. It's very hard to do studies. Maybe you guys know some more about studies that are undertaken on this. But I say, the empirical evidence and the anecdotal evidence is so strong on this that I can really safely guide patients to do it.
Yeah,
so I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to interject to say that's a great point, and one of the things that we always tout is that there aren't any side effects from trying it. So
yeah, the main side effect is perhaps the inconvenience. Certainly one side effect could be, to be honest, is that someone who is taking it too literally or is really compromised nutritionally and it doesn't implement this correctly, could take themselves into a corner food-wise. They could be on such a restricted diet that they could lose weight. And that, I think, makes some gastroenterologists mad, because they see patients who are depleted going on even more restricted diets. And they feel like, oh, my God, we have to just stuff these patients like Strasbourg geese. But I have to tell you that I find my motto with this diet is less is more, because when we have patients who embark on this diet, which is highly restrictive, they end up gaining weight. And the reason, obviously, as you know, the reason they gain weight is because they improve their absorptive capabilities and their GI symptoms abate and their loss of appetite is reduced, and they then are able to absorb more calories even though their choices are restricted. And also, because we administer fats as a preferred substrate, energy substrate, fats actually have 2.5 times the caloric value of carbohydrates. So, it's tough for doctors to understand this.
Yeah. Now, do you normally always go with SCD for somebody who's coming into you with a digestive problem? I mean, I know there's a lot of you have your own diet that you tout, the salmon and salad diet, as well as there's lots of other diets
Yeah,
out there,
I think
gaps and stuff.
yeah, I think that the SCD is an extreme measure where we might use it in patients who have chronic recurrent diverticulitis or very severe irritable bowel, like very incapacitating irritable bowel, um, or ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. And we have some patients who have also, I've had some amazing success with patients with radiation enteritis. You know, radiation enteritis is a little less of a problem now, but it's pretty common with treatment of bowel cancers, you know, with radiation, or treatment of especially uterine cancer where they irradiate the pelvis, and or you know, I guess it happens sometimes with ovarian cancer, and patients have terrible residual radiation enteritis. And I've really saved some people with this diet approach. I mean, there are people who you know, treated 10, 15 years ago whose lives were turned around because we gave them the right kind of diet. So, but I feel it's too much of an imposition for somebody who has a little GERD or you know, mild irritable bowel syndrome. We try not to do STD. I mean, sometimes STD is a trial, and we say, well, you know, let's see if this is diet related. Not all irritable bowel syndrome improves with diet modification, but mostly it will.
Yeah, I think that's something that that Jordan and I try to preach as well, which is that you know, give it 30 days and see if it works for you. And like you said, if it does do best for people who are having the worst symptoms, and that sometimes I think most people would recognize that if you do have milder symptoms, so maybe just trying to get rid of wheat or dairy or something like that might give you the results you're looking for.
But on the other hand, I mean, the people who have the most rip-roaring symptoms, they have such a degree of ulceration or inflammation that I usually say, you know, lock and load, do this for 90 days. And at 90 days, we should have at least some indication that this is possibly promising for you. And I say, let's do it in 30-day installments, because my role, I mean, it's easier for me to know what to do than to get people to do it. And my role is to say, look, I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen a lot of people have success, and to exhort people to try it and be sort of a change agent for them. And then I have an expert nutritionist who I work with, Layla Muden, who's really steeped in this. She actually used to work with Dr. Atkins. And by the way, Dr. Atkins, you know, in some ways his diet had some similarity to this, and just kind of coincidentally, he discovered that the diet that, you know, he used for weight loss, the Atkins diet, was pretty helpful for people with inflammatory bowel disease.
Oh, that's a really cool nugget. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually studies that even show that GERD responds to low-carb diets, and just like regular old GERD. So you tell people, look, don't eat starch, which is fermentable, and they'll have less bubble, toil, and trouble in their intestinal tracts. And you know, but it's not just the lower intestinal tract, the upper intestinal tract. I've helped a lot of people with GERD and reflux with this type of diet. Now they're told, you know, stay away from heavy meats and things like that. And, well, it's not necessarily the problem.
Okay, so I guess so. In your experience, then, in the in the clinical results and everything that you've seen, is there common mistakes or problems that people make when you tell them to go do a specific carbohydrate diet or something like
Yeah,
that? Is there?
yeah. The most common mistake is, as you probably know, is that people will say, wow, here's the diet, here's Lucy's Kitchen, here's like, the other one from Australia wrote a nice book, and look at all these great foods, all these great recipes, and let's get the almond flour, start baking the muffins, and, let's use the nuts, and they just have terrible GI problems because they're eating sort of the maintenance version of the diet rather than the induction version. So they're eating it, but they might have too many raw vegetables, they might be eating too much almond flour, which is, some people can't tolerate that in the early phases of the diet, and they get kind of blown away. So we have had to, we say that there's phase 1, there's phase 2, there's phase 3. For some of our patients, are you familiar with Jordan Rubin?
I don't think so.
Jordan Rubin is a guy who had ulcerative colitis and wrote a book. It's kind of interesting. It's sort of like God's diet, like the original Essene diet from the time when the ancient Old Testament people, what did they consume? There's sort of a quasi-religious undertone. But he personally helped himself with ulcerative colitis. I believe that's what he had. And he actually put together kind of an interesting healing broth recipe, which is very rich. You take bones and you basically cook them down so they're practically gelatinous, and you put some, you just cook the hell out of everything, and it makes it very easy and assimilable. And that's the kind of thing that might help a patient in the beginning. It's a healing broth kind of thing. You can actually post the recipe if you want it. I don't have it because my nutritionist has it. So people have to sometimes people just eat by rote instead of eating sensibly. A lot of people do that. So they say, well, eat a rather abrasive version of the specific carbohydrate diet when their GI tract is not healed or ready for it. So that is one of the problems. And, the other thing is, that kind of ties into another question is, do I depart from, I don't really necessarily depart from it. I think it's a good point of departure, specific carbohydrate diet, but I think it has to be individualized. So, for example, I test people for allergies and intolerance, and I find a fair number of people are sensitive to almonds. A fair number of people are sensitive to dairy, so they don't really do that well with the yogurt. They actually do better when they go to the yogurt. So it has to be individualized, and some of it can be based on allergy tests, although allergy tests are unreliable. And sometimes the patient will just say, hey, eggs are a problem for me. I know they're legal, but I can't eat them. And we'll actually find that they have very strong reactions to eggs when we do a antibody test. So that we have to individualize it. The other thing is, did Elaine Gottschall I know you make mention of carrageenan, obviously. Was it Elaine who picked up on that carrageenan connection, or was that subsequent? Because certain seaweeds and carrageenan are real irritants to the gastrointestinal tract, as you know, and they're off the diet. So we tell people that. And then there's also the issue of what are called microparticles, which I think you probably have heard that notion, that many medications and many foods are laced with microparticles. Various things like titanium dioxide as a whitening agent, and under a microscope it actually looks very jagged and has a crystalline structure that's potentially irritating the intestinal tract. So we try to get people off the microparticles.
Okay. Yeah, that's all great stuff, and I can echo as somebody who had problems with dairy and that kind of stuff. And Jordan had a major problem with eggs and stuff. So it's awesome that you go with the personalized custom version of SCD for everyone, because that's something that we found and something that we tried to spread the message about, because we found the exact same thing.
Well, I think a typical process might be somebody finds out about the book, picks up the book, reads my introduction, says, great, I'll do it. And they go, fantastic. I am so much better or virtually cured. That's great. And, and what will happen is the people I see tend to be the more challenging cases, because the people who say, I'm trying it, I'm not sure it's really working, and it means, let's face it, this diet is not uniformly or universally effective. I mean, let's stipulate that up front. I think it usually helps somewhat. There's some people, a small fraction of people, that it doesn't help at all, and for other people, just the diet alone is a home run, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it requires tweaking, I think, in some cases, because certain components of it may not be well tolerated. And the other thing the chapter say is that some people really, they have such, what the analogy I give is that if it were really possible to fight forest fires by finding and apprehending arsonists, we would actually, once we caught the arsonist, the fire would go out. But the fire is blazing, and even if we can discover the precipitants, you may need to put a lot of water on the fire to put it out. So that's where the drugs come in, and I think the drugs play a role. And I'm absolutely not averse to the medications. The only problem I have is the medications are used before the lifestyle approaches and the diet and certain beneficial supplements. So
So would you? So when you start someone off on SCD, do you normally prescribe them a certain set of supplements, or is it pretty individualistic?
I do. I think there's certain ones that really are plausible. I think part of the problem, though, is that also in the beginning when I was practicing, I had an idea of all these beneficial nutrients, right? So you said, well, give people vitamins and lots of, vitamin C, and that's healing and repairing, and, and zinc and B vitamins. And if you give someone who has rip-roaring and ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease a lot of vitamins, they're going to have pain, cramps, diarrhea. They're not going to tolerate that, even if that they might be depleted. So what I sometimes do in the worst cases, I actually give people sometimes intravenous vitamins because they're so bad they don't really have the ability to take and assimilate the vitamins given by mouth. I really much prefer to give it by mouth, and as soon as people are fine with the mouth, it's okay. I think another mistake that is made, and this is my own idiosyncratic view on this, but a few doctors I've talked to agree. A lot of patients who have ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease are profoundly anemic, right? So what do? It's iron deficiency anemia, so they give them iron pills. Now, iron pills are basically metallic, and putting a reactive metal into your gastrointestinal tract when you have rawness and bleeding and inflammation is bad. We know that iron actually promotes inflammation in many cases in the body. So even when people are anemic, I suggest that they try to address their anemia not with iron pills, but with natural sources of heme iron, which is from meat. And for some people, they have a bias towards it. They want to be vegetarians. I said, well, it's not going to work for you. You're going to have red meat because that's the most rich in iron. Like otherwise, sometimes I work with people who are ethical vegetarians, and I really feel my hands are, I really feel like I'm fighting with one hand tied behind my back because I can't get them the iron they need, and it takes a lot longer. So I generally don't use iron, prescription iron or iron supplements, but I use a lot of fish oil. I think enteric-coated fish oil is very beneficial. It should be enteric-coated so it opens up lower in the GI tract. I like certain herbs like boswellia and curcumin, and now there's evidence that olive leaf is beneficial, and resveratrol is beneficial, green tea is beneficial. So these are some things that may play a role in bringing about healing. And the evidence on glutamine was popular for a while, but I'm not so sure that it's that helpful in our patients. Sometimes we use what are called butyrate enemas, which can be prepared. Butyrate is a short-chain fatty acid that actually helps to repair the GI mucosa. That's when you have it's not going to go up all the way up into your intestine if you have proximal disease, but if you've got proctitis, it's helpful. So that can be used. And I also use probiotics. I think probiotics are beneficial. But what I've discovered lately is that in talking to some other doctors who do this, they've discovered that if you bomb people with probiotics, some people get worse. And some people inexplicably have a worsening with one or the other probiotic, and it's very idiosyncratic. We don't know why. And you have to take them seriously. So you can't just say, oh, that can't be because probiotics are good for you. They say they're worse. They probably are.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of people who, not a lot of people, but I would say a small percentage, maybe 30% or so, who do react very negatively to any probiotics at all. And it's pretty interesting.
You're the recipient of a lot of reports. And then the question is which probiotic. And, we have this VSL, number 6, which has some good data behind it. And then we have Saccharomyces boulardii, which is helpful for some people. And that's particularly good at suppressing Clostridial species in the GI tract. They use it for treatment of C. difficile diarrhea. Sometimes we use a product called bentonite or Sony number 7 for diarrhea.
What about digestive enzymes? Do you ever use those?
I don't use them that much. I don't, and maybe that's just a a bias or a blind spot on my part. I'm not sure that. I guess they can help. I mean, I'm not sure that they're the most important thing, though.
Okay. Well, I noticed, or I kind of picked up something earlier when you were talking, that you're a pretty big advocate for getting healthy fats in the diet. And I was just curious if any of your patients, when they start SCD and you try to switch them over to probably a lot more fat than they're used to eating, do they suffer with any problems as they transition there?
I guess that happens sometimes, but it's amazing the degree to which people's digestive tracts adapt, because it's like our digestive tracts are what are called facultative. In other words, if you don't use it, you lose it, but you don't permanently use it. You can, once you re-challenge, you can develop the ability again. So after a relatively short period of time, people are handling that stuff better than they think. I mean, this is, unless you have severe pancreatic insufficiency due to chronic pancreatitis, then you might have to be careful.
Okay. Any work you see with the stomach acid levels at all? Is that a common problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a popular thing. I know that Jonathan Wright talks a lot about making sure that you take hydrochloric acid so that you digest better. I don't really use that technique as much. I mean, I'm not saying that it's invalid. I don't find it that helpful for my patients.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, all that was extremely helpful for me, and I'm sure tons of our listeners. So I want to thank you for all that knowledge. And I want to go back a little bit. You said that you always want to try to make the supplement and diet tweaks first, and then if things aren't going as well as what you'd like them to, then you're not opposed to stepping up and using some Western medicine, some drug treatments like that. I was just wondering if you could kind of, give an overview for some people, because there's a lot of Crohn's and ulcerative colitis people who are already on drugs and they try SCD, or they're trying to figure out how to balance the two of them together. And I'd just love to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah, I mean, let's see if I'm going in the right direction for you. I think that, let's do this way. I see some patients who come to me on virtually all the full arsenal of medications, and they're crashing right through them. And they then go on the diet, and they experience improvement. Now, that does not mean that we just abandon the medications. It means that there may be a synergy between the diet and these medications in severe ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. And then the question becomes, part of what I do is when patients get better, then we have to say, well, when can we taper the medications? And a lot of conventional doctors take the position like, you're doing well, therefore let's just keep you on the medication. So I'm sometimes an advocate for tapering, pushing a little harder to get off, especially when we have evidence via endoscopy that the patient is clinically healed, or their SED rate, the CRP, the white counts, these are all normalizing. I'm not a gastroenterologist, and I insist that patients are followed by an expert gastroenterologist, and I refer them to gastroenterologists, and that's how we proceed. I just want to remind you, going back to supplements, another supplement that's extremely important in ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease is vitamin D. And vitamin D can actually be looked at as not just you need it for your bones, but it's an immune modulator. And I really like to get vitamin D levels up pretty high in those patients, so I might have them take 5 or 10,000 international units under supervision with retesting per day. And sometimes they require 50,000 twice a week to get back up. And I've never seen a case of toxicity, and I think it's really helpful because it does something to modulate immunity in autoimmune disease. And the other thing that I use is I make use of something called low-dose naltrexone. Are you familiar with low-dose naltrexone?
I am. There's some awesome research coming out on it.
Yep. Yeah, and so I find that there's been some patients where, the diet just wasn't working, and I remember one in particular, a kid who, he just was so unhappy on the diet, and he would have been willing to do the diet, but he did the diet for months and months and months with a lot of medication, and he just wasn't gaining weight, and he just wasn't there yet. And I said, well, there's this thing called low-dose naltrexone, and I started some medication, so let's do it. And no big deal. Okay, let's start it. No big side effects, relatively inexpensive, easy to take. And I think that was really the decisive thing that moved him. That got my attention because he's now, he was like very underweight and debilitated and couldn't attend school. Now he's in college. He's an athlete. He's an ROTC. He follows the diet religiously. I think we've already reintegrated some other sources of carbohydrates. Oftentimes we'll tell patients they can start putting rice back in, but as some people note that immediately they have recurrence of symptoms on that. Potatoes, pretty innocuous for some people, so we allow them to make life easier for themselves, especially if they're in sustained remission. So, there's definitely we like to integrate with by using medication. I guess the trick is when to dare to test the diet fully and take the trainer wheels off with the medication. And that's actually something that, you have to really develop a feel for.
So you don't really have it, you probably couldn't give any guidelines such as if someone was on, perhaps any of the medications, whether they're steroids or immune modulators or whatever, if they go on the diet, say it's been 2 months in, is that a time frame in which you would be looking to possibly start to take the training wheels off, or are you talking about a time frame that's
I'm
6
talking
months?
about I'm talking about a longer time frame, because I really think that these diseases are really serious. They take a long time to heal, and I actually think that subjective improvement precedes actual, complete systemic remission. And so, I know that when people are getting better, many conventional doctors will dismiss the diet and say, well, obviously these medications have finally kicked in, but I know that the diet is contributing a lot to that improvement. The question is it contributing 90% or is it contributing, 30%? And that, I think, you have to do a little trial and error. And it really is daunting because the pressure is on from the conventional doctors in some cases to just lock and load and just stay on these medications. And so sometimes it requires a little bit of daring, and you really need, I think, you need some medical supervision when you're making that decision from a doctor like me who's sympathetic to the idea of going alone off medication, but also is prudent. And I have to say this is one of the most difficult things I have to do. Is it's actually easier for me to say, okay, I got a really sick patient here. We're going to do this, 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 and then, it's easier to go that full court press. Then at the end of it, it's like, oh wow, I'm much better. It's like, okay, now we got a problem because it's you're so much better. You're on all these meds. Which shall we taper, and how fast? And that becomes a little bit of a clinical dilemma. And then the other question is, to what extent can we relax the stringency of the diet? And that's variable too, because we have some patients who, they go off the diet, and they're okay. But usually, if you go off the diet and you have a history of ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, you're asking for trouble. And I've seen it again and again. I've seen patients who say, hey, I'm cured. Thanks very much. And then, 2 years later, they'll come in looking like, they've lost, 35 pounds and they look horrible. And it's like, I really blew it, doc. I thought I was okay. Okay, well, at least we know what to do. You responded in the past to that, so let's go. And, so I think it's certainly preferable to remain on a diet, in my opinion, than to remain on medications that are unnecessary and potentially immunosuppressive and toxic. But for a lot of people, it's so convenient to be on the medications. They'd rather take the medications to shield them from the consequences of a bad diet. Or let's not use the word bad, but a diet that is not conducive to healing ulcerative colitis and Crohn's.
Yep, that's I can totally resonate with that thought, because that's something that Jordan and I try to blog about a lot, which is just kind of defining your goals. What are you trying to live symptom free, or are you trying to go through life maximizing your fertility and or your life, your
Yep.
life expectancy and that kind of thing, in which case you're willing to buck society's trend of eating a certain type of diet, and you're going to go ahead and do your own thing and manage your own health. So that's
Yeah, I
really
mean,
cool.
it is really, it's a personal decision. I mean, look, frankly, as you know, if this is such an effective thing that if it were easy, you'd have 30 million people doing it. But it's not easy. So it's not like people are beating down my doors to be taught this, because it takes, we really screen very carefully with our patients. We ask them, are you willing to make major dietary changes? Because if not, please don't come, because A, you won't get a good result, and B, we'll be wasting our time. So, pretty much we have to vet our patients to see if they're willing to make those big changes, which are, I got to say, I am in awe sometimes when I see like a 14-year-old or 15-year-old who is so beleaguered by their disease and so unhappy that they've missed school days and that they can't plan on going to college, that they just hunker down and do this. These kids are heroic, to make these choices because of all the social pressures to eat whatever the heck you want. I give them, they put a lot of trust in me that I'm going to deliver with this, and, I feel like I really want to go to bat for them because they're so dedicated to the proposition. But fortunately, their efforts do pay off very often, and it's not it's not just a hoax.
Yeah, no, it's really amazing the sacrifices that people make to take on the diet and get better. So that's awesome. Now, just going on that tangent, do you see a discrepancy in the various ages of people and how they respond to SCD changes or dietary changes, or is it?
Yeah. When it comes to, no, I actually don't see. I see it across the spectrum. I just had a woman who's in her 70s who, had. I think it's like her second bout of ulcerative colitis, and she's responded well. And then I've got the young kids who respond well, and I got the middle-aged folks who respond well. So, just a couple other things I would say. One of the things that I use, especially in men, is testosterone. If a man comes in and has really low testosterone, I will give testosterone because testosterone helps you fight disease. So it's a repair substance. It's not just to make you sexy so you can have better sex while you have ulcerative colitis. It's about repair, and it's also to prevent that kind of muscle breakdown that occurs with a serious disease. So I will use that as a tool. And by the way, many men who are, and it can be men who are like 45 or 50, or younger. I mean, young men. I just saw like a 20-year-old who's hammered, and his testosterone is pretty low. So this is a condition that saps your testosterone. And giving testosterone, I talked to one doctor who doesn't know anything about diet at all, and he just is like a hormone expert. And he's actually helped a lot of patients with ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease just by giving them testosterone. In women, and in men, you can give something called DHEA, and that's very helpful. DHEA is just a good thing for enhancing energy and helping the immune system. It's an autoimmune disease enhancer, but it's a hormone. It's actually an adrenal hormone. So I wanted to mention that.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. Do you go into exploring the thyroid as well with most of these patients?
I don't see that there's that much of a concordance with hypothyroid with that. It's not. This is an autoimmune disease, so we got to look at all the possibilities for autoimmune disease. But I'm not sure that there's a trend I'm seeing with low thyroid. There may be a few patients that have low thyroid in that, but I'm not sure that that's epidemic in patients with ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. So, I was going to say, yeah, those are some of the things we do.
Okay. Well, I guess a huge question here is, I know that our readers are going to love all this amazing information that you just shared with us. So where can they go to learn more about you, your books, or catch your radio show?
Sure. So I'll use the contacts. The radio show is it's on WOR Radio Network, and there's the website is WOR710.com, and there's WORradionet.com for the syndicated show. So we're heard, many states across the country and in Canada. So if you go to WORradionet.com, perhaps they can direct you to an affiliate, or better yet, listen to podcasts. A lot of people listen to podcasts these days. And you can download podcasts from WOR710.com or WORradionet.com, or go to iTunes, and it's Health Talk, Dr. Ronald Hoffman, and you can subscribe and listen to the show. And the show is obviously not Dr. Ronald Hoffman, the SCD, IBD show. It's just a wide range of topics, so I'd like to give people a lead on that. And then, my practice is in New York City, and I've got a website, drhoffman.com. And my most recent book is How to Talk to Your Doctor About Complementary and Alternative Medicine.
Yeah, and I can't wait to read it. I actually got it on my bookshelf here, and I haven't read it yet. What do you have? Do you have a few minutes just to say a little bit about that and give some people advice?
Sure,
Because
yeah. So I can talk about it. The reason I wrote that book is it's really, some people can come and see me, or doctors like me, and I'm not saying that what I do is by any means unique. There's well over 1,000, many hundreds of doctors like me across the country. We don't always do the same thing, and some people are not specializing in digestive ailments. But the book is, people have to navigate the medical system, and they may want to use some sort of holistic or complementary modality in whatever medical condition they may be facing, whether it's a surgery or whether it's cardiovascular problems, diabetes, any of those things. And the book basically goes condition by condition and talks about what you can do in conjunction with your conventional medical approach. But it also talks a little bit about why it's hard sometimes for your conventional doctor to get behind this, and what you can do to better collaborate with your conventional doctor. Really, it's not so much the doctor's fault. Some of them really are SOBs when it comes to this, but some of them are just not geared to work with this. And so there's a discussion of that in the book.
okay, that's awesome. I think it's hugely valuable because, like you said, you might not be the only one that does this, but it's still a small majority of people who are open to dietary changes and that kind of stuff. So as the rest of the field of physicians comes around to this, which I think they will over the next 10, 20 years, I think it's really important to have resources like yours available for the people who aren't as fortunate to be able to see someone like yourself.
Yeah, to comment on that, I have a little bit of a different vision of how that's going to proceed. It was a little less optimistic, which I don't know that conventional medicine is going to ever embrace this, frankly. I think, though, that more and more, almost like what's happening with government, more and more people are saying, okay, government, okay, well, it's a necessary evil, but there's sort of a populist movement, and the populist movement in medicine is a self-care movement. And one of the really appealing things about the SCD is that it's the essence of self-care. It's like, okay, your doctor can prescribe medication, but you're not going to really participate in that. All you have to do is open a bottle and take the pill. Can you do anything that's affirmative for your condition, whatever it is, whether it's irritable bowel or cardiovascular disease, to take the initiative to help yourself or to prevent disease? And I think more and more people are saying, I'm not getting that from the conventional medical establishment, and nor under these new schemes of healthcare do I even have the hope that these things will ever be integrated, when it's all now about cost containment and following guidelines that are becoming ever more circumscribed. The guidelines are actually more and more about, do this, doctor, don't go, here's the box, don't go out of the box, this is the protocol. And so I don't have that much hope that this is going to become part of the arsenal of many doctors, but I think that there will be sort of a parallel system, hopefully, or self-care infrastructure that's like, you guys are patient advocates here, and you're fired up about this, and I think we'll see more and more of this for various diseases, for cancer, for heart disease, for diabetes, that people are saying, the the medical system's broken. It's not going to fix itself, so we have to step in and provide that additional measure of intelligent care to make the system work better. So that's what I think.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hoffman, for the time. This has been an excellent interview, and I know it's going to help so many people. So thanks again for your time. And for everyone who listened today, just remember that you can go to www.drhoffman.com to learn more about Dr. Hoffman, get his books, and get a connection over to his radio show, Health Talk. So I just want to thank everyone for listening. This has been Jordan and Steve and the SC Lifestyle Solution podcast number 27.